Hi, everybody. This is Michael Levitas from JurisQ.com, a legal network, and I'm bringing back Sandra Spurgeon, an attorney from Kentucky that does civil litigation, complex civil litigation. Sandra, thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
In our first session, we introduced you, what you do, what inspired you, what drives you, how you are such a beacon of admiration for younger people out there with what you accomplished, how you wrote a book where you shared your knowledge with others about your experience in the courtroom. And now I want to use that experience of yours to digest some very newsworthy cases. And I'm going to begin with the most newsworthy case. It's no secret that a few days ago, estate of Donald J. Trump in Mar-a-Lago got raided by FBI based on a search warrant looking for something. A lot of controversy surrounding it. We're going to talk about it in a very cold-hearted, unemotional way, no politics involved, strictly law. Can you tell us, what do you think is the purpose of this raid? What is the FBI looking for that they weren't able to get through amicable discussions with attorneys for President Trump?
Well, there's what is called the Presidential Records Act, and it was enacted in 1978 when they believed that Richard Nixon was destroying the Watergate tapes. And essentially what the Presidential Records Act contains is that when a president leaves office, either he or his vice president, the records become the property of the National Archives. And the National Archivist is legally responsible for the maintenance of those records. There is an exemption for public disclosure of those records because they are the records of the public, but typically they are held either 5 or 6 years before they are released for public knowledge. Okay. And then the former president, has the ability to request an additional 5 years over and above that initial years from public disclosure. And what happened, from what we understand, is that when President Trump left the White House, there were documents, boxes labeled top secret. Okay. And they were removed to his Florida estate. From what we have been able to understand in reading and listening to Attorney General Garland's statement yesterday, we know that at least in June of 2022, FBI agents, as well as the chief of the counterintelligence for the entire country, appeared at Mar-a-Lago for a discussion with former President Trump's lawyers, and he was also present during a portion of that discussion. Okay. There were 15, my understanding, there were 15 boxes that had been turned over, and I believe they were trying to determine why those records were removed in the first place. Okay. When there is a law in place saying, they are not your property. When you leave, you're no longer the president and you're leaving the White House, they're to be turned over. Why they were not turned over. Right. And there were 15 boxes. And I believe it was then they learned that there were additional boxes that had not been released. So I think during the meeting, there was an instruction, they call it a request, but there was an instruction to padlock the door in which those other records were being maintained. And why those records were not surrendered at the time either in February when the initial 15 boxes were turned over, or in June when they appeared. It is clear anyone that has experience in dealing with the federal government, when they come knocking, they don't come knocking without a purpose or a basis. And they attempted to handle it amicably, quietly. Right. And so I'm not certain only Trump's lawyers and the counterintelligence, chief of counterintelligence and the FBI will be able to speak as to why there were boxes remaining. I don't believe they appeared with the search warrant at that time. but they left. And then we know that they returned, and with a search warrant earlier this week,
Right.
seeking to they sought the return of those boxes. It's been reported in the news. We've not seen any evidence of it, but some of the records contained information regarding nuclear weapons that are apparently, there are categories of top secret documents
Sure.
that have different categories, and some of the documents within those 12 boxes were of the highest degree of sensitivity, national security for our country.
Right.
There are issues regarding, when the raid occurred. There was all of the spin that was occurring. And what we saw yesterday was Attorney General Merrick Garland come out, who was appointed by Trump, which I think is very significant.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting, that saying enough is enough. You came forward. We tried to keep this quiet. We tried to keep the process strictly in advance with the protocol of the law, but you have come forward. You are making these statements that is bringing our departments in disrepute, in ill repute. We're not going to tolerate it. You calling us out, so now we're ready to release the search report.
They called the bluff.
They did, yes. And then now Donald Trump again, why be putting words in such as potentially planting evidence? Other than an inflammatory, rush to judgment, trying to get the public to react in a very irrational way, versus letting this process take its place. And I think that we're going to see this play out in a very negative way for the former president.
Yeah, Sandra, I agree with you because based on my observations, if this goes to an indictment, which it may, we'll talk about that soon, what's the likelihood of criminal charges against Donald Trump, his judge who would be sentencing him if he loses the trial is going to look at his conduct throughout the process. And in my opinion, if a judge sees that he was frivolous or dismissive of this process and making claims that could be exaggerated and inflammatory, that could work very much against him in sentencing. What do you think?
Well, it was a federal magistrate who signed off on the search warrant, but the federal magistrate certainly handles matters of discovery, everything up to dispository issues, dispository motions like motions for summary judgment, judgments on the pleadings, and then the federal judge would actually try the case. But I'm not certain if you've had the opportunity to look at the Department of Justice's motion to unseal the search warrant, and to make it a public disclosure, because they're saying it is a matter of public interest now because of the inflammatory statements made by Mr. Trump and his family. Is that you've got the chief of counterintelligence signing off on the motion to release. And you're exactly right. I mean, I think that we can talk strictly about the law. I will tell you from my experience that there is human subjectivity that goes into every case.
Exactly.
And I would not want to be on the receiving end of any court system, nor my client to be on the receiving end of any court system, any judge, any magistrate, particularly the FBI, the chief of counterintelligence, saying, you suggested that we planted evidence. Where was your proof?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a good advice for any client who is under scrutiny from federal authorities, is to really watch what you say, especially in public, because anything you say will be used against you.
I am very shocked that his attorneys allowed Eric Trump to make that statement, if they were even aware that he was going to come out and make the statement. But again, today, former President Trump, or last night, said possible planting
Right.
of
Yeah,
evidence.
that's very, very grave allegation.
Right. And then then there was a statement that they wouldn't even let the lawyers see the search warrant. Well, I have been covered up in press media events speaking about it when I was saying we're tired of hearing from the biased parties. We're the lawyers. Lawyers are bound and governed by Rule 11 sanctions. And
Mhm.
so they're not going to make such reckless statements.
Right.
And unless there's a basis to it. And when you heard the female attorney, when she was being called out, she hadn't been previously disclosed to the FBI or to
Mhm.
the Department of Justice of
Mhm.
ever having been involved in any of this
I
process.
see. Mhm.
So
Yeah,
who
as an
would turn
example of
that
what you're
over to
saying.
her?
Yeah, Sandra, that's a very good point you bring up. As an example where attorney was speaking out and also making inflammatory statements is Rudy Giuliani, because he was actually disbarred for making allegations about the elections, and that they were deemed to be very improper by New York State Bar. So even an attorney has to be very, very mindful of what they say in public, at least.
That is correct.
Yeah. Sandra, let me ask you a question. We know that this raid was very comprehensive. We know this from the words of Mr. Trump. He says they went everywhere, the whole Mar-a-Lago, the whole estate, every closet, every office, even broke into his safe. If they find something else that is not relevant to taking documents out of the White House, or different documents, let's say they find, I don't know, tax records which may show some kind of a tax evasion or something else, could that also be used for any basis for criminal charges?
My understanding is that evidence properly seized during an arrest with not an arrest warrant, but with
Search
a
warrant.
search and seizure warrant.
Mhm.
If there is evidence of another crime, yes, it can be
Mhm.
used.
Okay, so that is definitely a very dangerous development, and it's a cautionary tale that maybe it's better to comply when feds are asking for information and having them come in to your place of business or where you live.
That is correct. And
Yeah.
my understanding is that from watching the news, just like
Mhm.
the rest of America is doing right now,
Mhm.
they found records in a room near the pool,
Right.
which was not in the area in which they had previously identified that that's where the records were being stored.
I see. Okay, that's also an interesting factor. Um, in your experience, how likely is it that following a execution of a search warrant, there will be an indictment? Because usually, from what I've seen, once there's a search warrant, look, they must have shown to the judge some kind of allegation of criminality. So they already have something to go on. They just need the search warrant to prove their case. So if the search warrant doesn't cover something, how likely you think that's going to lead to an indictment of a former president?
I think they'll take it to the grand jury, a federal grand jury, and there will either be a true bill returned or not.
Mhm.
You know, you have to remember that before they took the search warrant to the federal magistrate to sign, they had to list the crimes in which they believe have been committed.
Right.
So, you can only imagine the political implosion that's going to occur um, if Mr. Trump's allegations by he and his family are true.
Mhm.
Um, and you can only imagine the ramifications that
Of
are going
course.
to occur if the basis of the search warrant, if the documents bear out evidence of a crime.
Yeah, the timing right now is we're living in a very interesting times, because there are midterm elections coming up, and then in a few years presidential elections where Trump may or may not run. We're going to see how this plays out. You mentioned grand jury. The grand jury will have to issue an indictment or not. From what I've seen, grand juries they just rubber stamp what the prosecutor is asking for, because in the grand jury, only one side is present, which is the prosecutor. They don't hear from the defense. So they only get one side of the story. So in my opinion, once there's grand jury convened, it almost guarantees an indictment. What do you think?
I don't know that I disagree with, I mean, I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay.
I've been involved in cases on a state level
Mhm.
where I've been called as a witness in a grand jury proceeding where there was no indictment.
Okay.
So that has not been my experience 100% of the time. And I don't think we can sell jurors short. They're very intelligent.
I see.
And I think for me, it's in someone who has practiced law for 30 years, who loves the practice of law, who understands the integrity of our court system and holding it in high regard, and particularly our federal court system. It is very difficult to swallow to hear some of the accusations that are being made and
Right.
leveled upon the heads of our court system, in which it is one of the means by which the only remedy that American citizens can come and seek justice or redress. And things don't always go our way. I don't always win. I don't win every battle, but I certainly thank them for their consideration. If I get overruled, I thank them. If they sustain me, I thank them. And I understand there's a lot of emotion involved in this, but
Yeah.
I don't believe that you can sell a grand jury short. There's a, when you talk to people and you're able to, when they start cutting through the bull, and when we take the emotion out of it, every jury that I have ever had the pleasure of being in front of, they really have examined the evidence. I don't know that I've ever had a jury that I believe that came back and ruled in favor of me because they liked me. I mean, I see them take exhibits back into the jury room. I hear them asking to come out and listen to testimony. Or they want to hear it again because they may have a different take. Jurors may have a different take on what they heard. So I think that we're dealing with a very savvy body of individuals typically in our juror system.
Okay. Look,
And
you have more experience with the system than me. I really hope that there's integrity in the system, and like you said, that the grand jurors will do their job to actually examine the evidence if a grand jury is convened, and we'll see how this process plays out. One final question: if there is an indictment issued, and then the next step is arrest of a former president. I mean, right now, like I said, we're not hoping for it. We are dealing strictly with facts, with the law. We're talking right now in theory. If it happens, in your opinion, that Donald Trump gets arrested, based on what you saw occur during the raid, where it came unannounced as a surprise, agents just burst into Mar-a-Lago. Do you think that President Trump will be afforded an opportunity to self-surrender? Or likewise, in the middle of the night, the agents will drag him out in his pajamas from wherever he is?
I certainly would not expect that. I think that there would be an arrangement for him to turn himself in and to post bail. I think there would be a bond hearing. Certainly his attorneys they're very savvy, and they savvy enough to not play that card. And I don't think he's a flight risk.
Right.
I think he'll go down fighting. And until there's a conviction, by the way, he has the ability to run for office. So it's not going to, would not affect his ability to run for office unless there would be a conviction against him before the election.
And by the way, if he wins, now it's for him, it will be crucial to win, because if the case is still ongoing, he wins, he can technically pardon himself and make these charges go away, if any.
That's a question I haven't thought of. Thank you. And I will research that answer. I do not know if an individual can pardon themselves.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting point to see if, in the event, it culminates in criminal charges, this
Right.
process. Sandra, thank you so much. I love how you broke it down in very simple terms for everybody to understand, because I know the whole country is following. Both half the country that's for Trump and the other half which is against Trump, right? Everybody's following, everybody is interested, and this is why we brought you in to explain it to our audience. And you bet we're going to ask you to come back again to go over some more cases that are newsworthy, that are interesting to follow. Sandra, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for listening in, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.